So you guys made an announcement recently. Talk to me about ClearLine, why, what it's doing, how it works.
Yeah, so you're right. It was a recent announcement. It kind of was a 2-year journey where publishers and their agency partners had really reached kind of this loggerhead as it relates to how they normally interact and do business, right? And we're talking almost exclusively here high-end premium video. And so publishers, think of large broadcasters, et cetera, they've been doing this sales thing for 50 plus years.
Yep.
And they have a really strong opinion as to how they would like to bring their inventory to market. And likewise, agencies have deep relationships with these broadcast partners, and they don't want to necessarily be disintermediated by me, by any other tech player. And so what they really asked us to do is to bring the best of programmatic, but make it more simple and tighter connection between the buyer and the seller. And so that's the journey we set on. And SpringServe, the acquisition of the video ad server, was an integral piece of being able to make that happen. And so, headlines have been, the death of the DSP, and we're trying to become a DSP, and that's nothing to do with that. DSPs will still be the vast majority of all the business that's transacted on our platform is going to come from DSPs. They're essential to be able to do most of programmatic buying. There's just going to be some corner case scenarios where agencies and publishers would like to be a little bit tighter in terms of the connections.
Can you give an example? Like, what is a use case of that tight connection that you're sort of enabling now?
Well, I think that, look, what's the appeal of programmatic? Well, it's workflow, that's a piece of it, but data-driven targeted advertising. And that data, in large part, when you talk about premium video, mostly rests with the publisher. And so the publisher was very reluctant to share that data that they have across the ecosystem, so they wanted to keep it a lot tighter and closer to home. And that's kind of where SpringServe ad server comes into play. They can park it there, and it's nice and safe for them, and it can't be replicated. And the buyer wanted that data, and they can bring their own data as well. So data is a very good use case. The other piece is, working media, right? The idea of transferring linear dollars to programmatic and then having to pay the ad tax on top of that is kind of untenable. Like, if you're used to paying a mediation 75 basis points and then all of a sudden you're looking at 20% on maybe both sides of the equation, that's really going to stop a lot of those dollars from flowing into the programmatic system. And so therefore it creates more balanced economics for both buyer and seller. And I think it's going to be great because it's going to accelerate the shift of dollars into the programmatic world. And you know what will happen, and it always does, then publishers get more comfortable with that, and they'll start to lean into biddable, and they'll say, boy, how do I know if this is the right price? Maybe an invite-only auction makes sense. And a buyer will become more accustomed to that. And so I think you'll see this mature into much more of a biddable, programmatic world. But you got to start somewhere. And when that happens, DSP partners will be back in, and those dollars will be flowing through DSPs.
Well, it's interesting because there's still such a stigma associated with programmatic. And what we're talking about is programmatic being multifaceted, which you and I always knew.
Right.
But you start to see that kind of dimensionality playing out right now. And
that's right.
I think this is an example of it.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think people think programmatic is synonymous with open auction and 20 platforms and DSP seeing inventory 20 different times from the same publisher and fighting through all those inefficiencies. And so I think that this is much more programmatic as it relates to kind of workflow and efficiency.